podcast little mini series right now, kind of like maybe it's going to be the first of its kind for us in an ongoing series as we see fit. And that is, I want to combat the wokeism and the revisionism in light of God in American history. The reason why Americans and the world has heard the term American exceptionalism, most people today, young people, certainly do not know the meaning of that term. It doesn't mean that we're better than anybody else. It means that God has done things in our country that he has not done with other nations. And that list is almost infinite if you take the time to study from the times of going back even as far as 1605 in my recollection with Pastor Hunt in what would later become Virginia. That said, I want to just bring you just drop in no particular order. I want to just drop you into scenes in American history. These will obviously not be exhaustive. They hopefully will get you to go and research. And we just checked a moment ago, beware of Wikipedia, please. Beware of even some of the U.S. history sites that will question or cast doubt regarding things that remarkably are enshrined in granite or marble in our country, that you can go. These monuments have been there for decades, some over a century or more, where these great events have happened, eyewitness accounts. And then, you click on, because you want a 15-second answer, and it tells you, well, it may or may not be true that George Washington fought this battle here or said this there. And it just is demonic. Hath God said? Well, it's certainly true when it comes to American history. And I just want to bring to your attention one of those things. And again, I'm going to paraphrase and draw up a recollection, but if you want to know more, I encourage you to go to books like this, Miracles in American History by Susie Federer. I encourage you to go to Anything by William Federer, her husband, William Federer. Look at American Minute with William Federer, American Minute. Great history lessons, all documented. But one thing I want to just bring to your attention is something that is so inspiring. And I see it every day in my office. In my office behind me is a replica of the oil painting, which was given to me. I originally purchased it at Mount Vernon, and then I wound up actually exchanging that one out because a great-grandson, I believe, Feinberg, is the original painter of that. The great-great-grandson gave me a very rare collector's item of that painting that's in my office. So I know a lot of people have the painting. I've been blessed to have an actual Feinberg give me that. And so what is that? It's that famous posture of George Washington kneeling beside his horse in prayer in the snow. The first thing that a critic is going to ask is, well, how do we know? There's no selfie taken. There was no pictures and photography. How do we know that they really happened? And then the prayer is recorded. Did you know that? In history, the prayer of Washington is recorded. When I say recorded, I mean written down. How do we know that? Well, because there were several, certainly one guy for sure, could have been up to 3 guys who, for either mischief, we're not sure exactly where Isaac Potts stood on, was he a spy by the British infiltrating our camp at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania? Or was it that Peter Gabriel Muhlenberg, the awesome soldier, commander, and pastor, overheard this? Or was it another individual whose name I forget right now? Anyway, by either 1 or 3 witnesses, this is what happened. Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, where I encourage you to go visit because it's epic. It's just preserved perfectly, is where the U.S. troops had been I want to say bed down for the winter, which is what you had to do in those days, but they had no beds. They were gathered together. Our troops had no shoes. They were worn out. Because of that, feet of the soldiers were being frozen, turning black. Many of them were amputated. We were losing in Valley Forge in the middle of winter with no war. We're just waiting for spring to come. We were losing 12 guys a day. 12 soldiers were dying per day at Valley Forge because of being frozen to death or starvation. Valley Forge is where they began also to add to their own problem. In desperation, they began to boil the leather of some of their gunpowder packs, their soles of their shoes. They began to boil leather and drink the broth and chew on the leather. Have you ever tried to chew on leather? But when you're starving to death, that's what you do. Then they wound up taking their knives and they went and they carved bark off of trees to eat the bark. And Washington was so concerned and so daily in prayer that at a time of profound grief, he rode a little distance away from this horrible sight, and Washington prayed this epic prayer asking God to perform a miracle. And it is understood and it's recorded that it was the spirit of liberty that kept those alive who were alive. It was the love of liberty that kept them going. And as Washington, by the way, went around the camp, he would encourage them about freedom, about liberty. Listen to this. We in America know nothing about this level of depth of commitment, integrity, and of endurance. Washington encouraged the troops that their cause that they were fighting for and dying for was worthy, that it was a noble cause to bring and to fight for liberty and for the birth of a nation. You think about that. If you don't have Christ in your life, what do you have worth living for? And there are those good people who know history. They understand this stuff really well. They understand that America is worth dying for. I would hope that a Canadian thinks and believes that Canada is worth dying for. I certainly know for a fact that the Israelis know and believe that Israel is worth fighting for and dying for. But the remarkable thing is that Washington went around, and one of the things that he said is what I'm quoting to you here now, is he told the soldiers, "Fear God and trust in the Lord. Our cause is great." And so he kept drilling that into their hearts, into their minds. And so I want to encourage you that we're talking about a group of fighters, soldiers, citizen soldiers, mind you. This is not a standing army. These are farmers. If you read about our American history and the American Continental Army, you know that they were farmers. And did you know that they would come and fight for a few months and then go back to their home and harvest the fields and plant seed and then leave and go back to the battle? And Washington had to juggle. He and his brigadier generals were the full-time guys. The other guys fighting the battles were citizen soldiers, Minutemen. And so they weren't even professionals, or like the British called their own regulars. The British had literal full-time paid warriors. Well, we had nothing but farmers. But the amazing thing is that those farmers had to hunt for their food. They shot rabbit, they shot pheasant, they had to shoot. So the age, now this is the age of those guys at Valley Forge, but it does speak regarding almost all of our battles. The ages of our soldiers were somewhere between 20 and 60. That was the bulk, but there are some outliers. In the book of 1776, written by David McCullough, he points out that some of the soldiers were 14 years old. 14 years old. And yet, it was observed by the British command that these kids were better marksmen than his regulars. And the answer for that was because the American citizen had to hunt for his food. He had to use his gun daily. to sustain and to provide meat for his family. Thus, with a very, very difficult instrument to use, that is the flintlock or pan-fired musket, a huge long barrel rifle. I say rifle. That's not exactly true at that moment. The barrel was not yet rifled. It was just pure bore musket ball where they would shoot this ball out of a long musket, and the aim was horrible. It wasn't until later that they started rifling the barrels, so that would cause the bullet to spiral and be more accurate. These kids, all the way up to men of 60 years of age, they were able to pick off British soldiers at a huge, alarming rate to the British regulars, because one American citizen soldier was extremely skilled because he knew his rifle, or he knew his musket, and he knew how to use it. And so in light of all this stuff, we were outnumbered, we were outarmed, but God gave, like David, Lord David prayed, give me skill in battle. And God did that to our founding soldiers for our founding nation. And as they were starving to death in Valley Forge, it seemed like it was completely over. At that time, by the way, keep this in mind, Washington with the troops at Valley Forge, they're about 25-ish miles away from Philadelphia, which is now under British control. In fact, the Liberty Bell that is now on display in Philadelphia at the Independence Hall, the Liberty Bell was taken down from the hall, and it was carted away almost 100 miles, 80 miles away, I believe it is, to Allentown, Pennsylvania, to hide the Liberty Bell. Isn't that awesome? And they held it, hid it in the basement of the First Zion Church in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Think about that. Who's going to go through the effort to save a big bronze bell? Well, it's not that it's a bell. Do you know what was written on the bell? Leviticus 25, verse 10. Proclaim liberty throughout all of the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. And that bell was our symbol of freedom. But we were dying. And what happened was, this is awesome, look this up. The troops were starving to death, and it is most certain that we are going to now lose any hope of freedom and liberty. And I believe it's 2 or even 2.5 months ahead of spawning season. And I'm trying to remember the name of the fish. The water was shallow. The spawning season of these fish that would move in from the shoals of the Atlantic upriver to spawn, I want to say shad. I'm not a fisherman, so I don't know. It doesn't matter. Look it up. Shockingly, a miracle happened. The fish began to show up in advance, and they swam. Oh my gosh, one of our shad. I was correct. I'm 65 and a half years old, and I haven't totally lost my mind yet. These shad showed up, and it was written by eyewitness accounts that they were so numerous in number that you could walk across the fish on the river, because the river was so shallow. And what happened? I believe, I know. God sent them 2 months ahead of schedule, because those soldiers that were dying began to feast on shad, and they were strengthened and re-strengthened for the battle. And the rest is history, as the saying goes. But my friends, listen, that's what makes America exceptional. It's not us. It's what God does. And what's amazing is that how in the world does a citizen army defeat the greatest power on earth, okay? That would be like Cuba destroying the United States, defeating the U.S. entire military forces. Our citizen soldiers defeated the biggest war machine on earth. You got to remember, at the time of 1775, London was considered to be the largest city in the world of a population of 1 million people, and it was also understood to be the capital of the earth, London. Did you know that at the time of our independence, Britannia ruled the waves. They ruled the oceans. From the Bay of Bengal to Canada to North America, India, the sun. Listen, the sun never set on the British Empire. That's how big it was. And the United States colonial forces lost more battles to the British than we won. So how do we win? Makes no sense. The victory at Yorktown was an absolute miraculous victory. By the way, these are places that are national parks today. You can go to visit those spots. You should take your kids on a field trip and go and play. You can actually go there, and the readouts are still there. They've never changed. They didn't remake them. The readouts where they set up their cannon fire and all of that, you can still go there. In fact, just down the street in Yorktown is Thomas Nelson's house. You know, Thomas Nelson Publishing, Thomas Nelson, his house, many of their homes still stand. In his house, there's cannonballs still stuck in the walls in Yorktown. We lose more battles, but we win the war. Does that sound familiar, Christian? How many battles do you and I lose? You and I lose battles all the time. But the Bible says the war has already been determined. We fight our battles as believers every day. Could be depression, could be finances, could be relational challenges, could be the drama and the terror that divorce brings to a family. It could be life and death situations. It could be just you standing for righteousness and being hated by your community, including your own family. You've been isolated and cut off, whatever it might be. Have you noticed the battles that we have, so many times we fail at them? And yet, according to the Bible, it says that the war has already been determined. Washington, unless God told him something that we didn't know, Washington never flinched. He never gave up. He never quit. He felt like it. And you can read his own writings, by the way. I've read them many times. He was so severely depressed that he wrote his family members, Lund, Washington, and others, about how he had never been more depressed and despairing of his life than at this moment, he said. And if I would have known our plight and dilemma, that when Congress commissioned me, I would have denied the challenge. He said, if I had to do it all over again at that moment of depression, I never would have said yes to being general. You ever feel like that? Of course we do. But Washington hung in there because, listen, 5 a.m. every morning, Washington read his scriptures and prayed, according to Washington. And then when time allowed it, if they were not engaged in battle, he did it again at 10 a.m. George Washington. Incredible man of God, a man of destiny. That's why he's called the father of our nation. There's nobody like him ever. And if we were writing the Bible today, Washington would no doubt be included. But what I want to leave you guys with is the fact that you may be in your Valley Forge situation where it's just hopeless. I don't even know how we're going to eat tonight. I want to remind you that all of these moments of God's divine intervention in our lives, we're to read them, friend, student, mom, dad. we're to read this stuff to give us courage. Because I'm reminded right now of another group of people who are starving. In Germany, there was an orphanage, and that orphanage was dependent upon the donations of people in that town. And without the donations of the people in that town, these orphans would have nothing. And George Mueller, you ever heard of George Mueller? George Mueller was the overseer of that orphanage, and they had run out of milk, they had run out of bread. And Mueller didn't know what to do except but to ask God for help. And all the boys sat down at the table. Think of the faith this takes. Muhlenberg didn't say a word to the guys, to the kids, that there was no food or milk. And Muhlenberg, a famous painting. By the way, some of you have this in like the Daily Bread devotions. There's a picture of a man praying like this, sideways like this. It's George Mueller. And he's praying. And he's thanking God for the food, and there's no food. The little boys are there praying. And they don't know nothing. And why would he burden them when they can't do a thing about it anyway but pray? And Muhlenberg said, God, we thank you for this food today. In Jesus' name, amen. And if I do remember the story correctly, if not, I stand corrected. While he was praying or shortly after he prayed, there's a knock at the door, and there was a wagon driver. And he said, the wheel of my wagon has broken off, and I'm en route to deliver this morning's bread to market. If I don't unload this bread, it's going to rot. Can you use it? They brought it in. The guy left. They're eating bread. Mueller goes to the door, opens it up, and there's a driver of a cart, and it was a milk cart, and it had broken down. And he said, Mr. Mueller, this milk's going to spoil if I can't unload it now and have it be used. And they had milk. God's intervention. God will intervene in our lives. Listen, almost always not according to our timing. Almost always not when we expect. In fact, almost always when we have lost heart, or almost. When we've come to the end of it all and we say things like, I have no reason to live anymore. The cart arrives, the milk comes, the bread is on the plate, the fish swim, and you're saved. Look to God to provide for all of your needs. We'll come back with more of these really moments in American history that we can bring to your attention, but by all means, study them yourself. And so listen, please, you can thank us. Really, listen, keep your money. You can thank us by subscribing. You can thank us by sharing this with others. Hit subscribe, share with others, and by all means, remember this. We believe strongly here that it's time for you and I to live out what we believe in, because it's time for real life. It's time for authenticity. God is waiting to move in your life. God bless you.
This Jack Hibbs podcast, as well as all the broadcast outreach opportunities, are listener supported. Will you consider partnering with us through a special gift? Go to jackhibbs.com to learn more and stay connected.
Hey everybody, welcome to Real Life, and we are going to be having an amazing time right now. We hope you enjoy it. Charlie Kirk and I are going to be talking about Genesis 11 and how it applies to our world today. What's going on in the world and what's happening in relation to the Genesis 11? You might be shocked. So listen, be blessed by this. Jesus said that in the last days before he returns, that it would be as it were in the days of Noah and as in the days of Sodom and Gomorrah, but we don't often think about as it was in the days of Nimrod. And if you're a student of eschatology, which is Bible prophecy, the prophetic word of God, which is 27 to 30% of the Bible, Nimrod is understood in Bible prophecy as a forerunner, a prototype of what we would call today the Antichrist. 1 John tells us that there's many Antichrists, that they are against Christ, but he said there's also the Antichrist that's coming. Well, Nimrod is a forerunner of that. We're going to talk about that tonight, and we're going to bring together what happened then and what is happening now. And there's nobody better to talk about this stuff than Charlie, seeing how you are the official reset guy and everything else.
Yeah, you know, Jack, thank you for that. I and all of you, but mostly Jack. You know, I get stopped in the grocery store. I get stopped at airports. You're the great reset guy. Like, what does that even mean? Like, I'm the one that's doing the great reset? No, I mean, so thank you, Jack. I get all sorts of wonderful letters in the mail and death threats, and all thanks to you. And I'm eternally grateful to be known as the great reset guy. But tonight we're going to build off of that and add a new wrinkle. But also, if you've not heard any of those discussions before, that's okay, because this is also a really important place to start. And so Jack and I were texting back and forth. I said, Jack, I've been really diving into Genesis 11, and I think there's so much to be learned from this for the time that we're in, where we are headed, and also this idea, does the Bible clearly speak to political matters?
Yeah.
It's all right there in Genesis 11.
It's all right there. So it's amazing what we're going to be talking about tonight, and I'm so happy to know that Charlie was saying earlier today that Genesis 1 through 11 have become the most important parts of the Bible to him, and my heart jumped inside of me. I don't know if many of you know that, but everything about the entire Bible, all 66 books, is really, really condensed in the first 11 chapters of the book of Genesis. From redemption, salvation, globalism, of obviously creation, and so much more. It's just absolutely incredible. So he's been studying that. We're going to be looking into it. And it's a great time right now because of all the talk about globalism, all the talk about nations basically breaking down. Think about it. It's almost as though things are so skewed that who's in charge here? And filling the gap and the void are some institutions that are even non-elected type institutions like the World Economic Forum. I mean, these are non-elected people.
Yeah, and this text is so amazing because it shows what man tries to do every time they try to get power. And this pattern will replicate itself whether it's in the Fertile Crescent, whether it's in Mesopotamia, whether it's in the Nile River. Man will always act the same. And that's why Genesis 1 through 11 is so important, and why every pastor in America should slow down.
That's right.
And teach the truth there. It tells you why you're here. It tells you what type of being you are. It tells you that you need Jesus Christ. It says it so clearly that you need redemption, that God is going to send a rescue mission because he loves you so much. It says explicitly that God loves you in the first 11 books of Genesis. So it all lays it out. But it also lays out this idea of what happens when human beings defy God and they try to do things for themselves, especially when it comes to political matters. And so I hear from pastors all the time, you know, the Bible doesn't speak clearly about politics. It's just, I only preach the gospel. I hear this, it's nauseating. I'm sure you hear it too. This right here is an explicitly political text. So what is politics? Let's just put everything you think you know about politics, let's put aside. It's very simple. Politics is human beings organizing to decide who gets power. That's it. Stop talking about Republicans or Democrats. All that stuff is just temporary manifestations of an eternal question of who gets power. Now in Genesis 11, they say it explicitly.
That's right.
They say, and this is important first because it's called the Tower of Babel, but it really is more accurately the city of Babel.
Yeah.
And I want to zero in on that. The tower is important because they wanted to reach the heavens, and that kind of gets the headline. But the very lead is that they wanted to build a centralized community, a city for themselves. And they made a decision to deny and defy God.
That's right.
We're going to do this for ourselves. We're going to do something so great in the earthly and temporal realm that we don't need God. And that right there is a direct challenge to what was set up in the first 10 books before that there is a God and you are not him.
That's right.
And in Genesis 11, Nimrod and his people said, no, we're gonna make a name for ourselves.
That's right.
We don't need God. Look at how amazing, and this is why the text is so incredible. It tells you the type of bricks that they're using.
That's right.
This shows you that this really happened, by the way. This is not some sort of fable.
It's
not some sort of fairy
tale. It's not a
tale.
story.
This is real. This happened. This is history. It's trying to teach us that we're always, because of our broken nature, as it says in Genesis 6, the heart of man.
That's right.
That if we are not self-aware and constantly making sure we're oriented to God, then we are going to do things for ourselves and it's going to end terribly. That's one of the things that Genesis 11 is trying to teach us.
Isn't it interesting that Nimrod said, let's build a city? First time we ever hear that. And cities are known for the propagation of evil.
That's right.
And danger. Man doesn't do well in cities unless God is the builder.
It's interesting, both the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, and Thomas Jefferson both hated big cities. The American founders read this text and they designed a system of government to say, we do not want all this power in cosmopolitan, densely populated urban areas.
That's right.
In fact, the founding fathers were so biblically literate. If you read the Federalist Papers, Alexander Hamilton, Federalist 47, Federalist 51, Federalist 58, they talk time and time again about the heated passions in cities where rancor, rumor, and half-truths reign supreme, where the mobs and the masses are able to get what they want, but reason goes to die. God tried to warn us in Genesis 11, hey, if you guys build these cities, all of a sudden you're not going to be governed by your reason, your rationality, or your logic, but it's going to be the tyranny of the clamoring majority. My goodness, you look at federalism, states' rights, you look at this idea of the local church, all of that is saying we learned the lesson from Genesis 11 and we're not going to try to build something central or something big or something strong. And you see that at direct odds with the World Economic Forum, with what they're doing right now.
Yeah.
The World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab, what are they doing? They might as well sing this as their national anthem or their international anthem, right?
Wow, yeah.
We are going to make a city for ourselves. We're going to do this thing. We're going to change human nature. We're going to be like gods. Right. Now, the first 11 books of Genesis, and Genesis 11 combines almost every one of these forces together, is it sets up the necessary distinctions of which we take for granted. One of the tricks of the enemy, and the end times talk about this, and Jack, you know, you talk about this so brilliantly and wonderfully, is going to be the intentional blurring of distinctions that allow us to be free, that allow us to grow closer to God. And every single one of them is laid out in the first 11 books of Genesis. For example, the distinction of God and man, that we are not God and we should worship God, but we are made in the image of God, as it says in Genesis 1:26 and 1:27. As it says in Genesis 1:1, which is the verse that changes everything. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That means that there is a being greater than you that has a purpose for you to be here, that your existence is not a mistake. The World Economic Forum does not believe that.
The World Economic Forum that recently met, like you said in Davos, they published a bunch of papers, but one of the papers that they put out was a discussion that they had regarding the role that faith plays in the World Economic Forum. Now you say, Jack, what are you guys talking about, World Economic Forum? It's a gathering of some of the world's most powerful financiers, bankers, politicians, movers and shakers. We'll sum it up that way. These people go there and they get these ideas from globalists. Then they come back to their countries and they all, so to speak, attempt to speak the same language. Environmentalism, socialism, whatever ism. Let's all talk these talks. We go there to Davos, we unify our speech, we try to assemble what was dissembled at Babel. We're trying to put it together, and then we're going to launch it in the world and talk one language. What's very interesting is, and I just read it today, on faith, they recognize that faith is a vital role to the human machine, to humanity. And they seek to work with faith-based people, individuals, because it's such a vital role. They said that they want to meet with faith leaders of the world. They said that they want to have a dialogue with them. And then they published, I think it was 7 concerns that the World Economic Forum has regarding religious people. And they listed them. And one of them, I'll bring up a few of them. They're in my memory right now. One of them is that one of the problems with religious people that they need to get over is that they are not willing to experience change. Well, I disagree. Jesus changed us dramatically and radically. They said that religious people are hard, determined, and set on the belief that abortion is wrong and that globalism is wrong. That needs to change. So watch what they're doing. They're embracing, this is kind of scary, and then I'll let Charlie go. They're talking about faith and the need for it, but they want to control the dialogue and the issues of what faith is defined as. And so when you read it, you come away with this: watch out for pastors who are globalist minded. You say, I would never listen to a globalist minded pastor. There are pastors who are embracing, for example, socialism. There are pastors who are embracing racism, LGBTQ, add whatever. How did this happen? It's part of a global agenda, and it's happening worldwide at the same time. Absolutely remarkable. They said it. They're not hiding it. The question is, wherever you fellowship, is it happening in your religious denomination or faith-based group? You need to be careful. These days are here.
What's very interesting is the fake and false religions of the isms. Marxism, LGBTQism, wokeism. What we know, obviously through our common sense and our life and shared existence, but also what we know in Genesis 11 is that there is this gap between God and man. We believe only Jesus Christ can bridge that gap because Jesus is God. That's
right.
why. It is God becoming man.
That's right.
The human beings do wacky and weird stuff to try to bridge that gap. And in reality, they actually usually create more distance when they start to embrace these isms. Now, when you read the first 11 books of Genesis, I encourage you to do this understanding some backdrop. That as this book was written, as Moses was given to this directly by God, the predominant view of the region and in the known world was paganism. Was multiple gods. There's a river god, there's a rock god, there's a sun god, there's all these different gods. And the contention of the Bible is that there is one God. That was an unknown concept. What do you mean there's one God? Not only is there one God, whatever he says happens. And God spoke it into existence.
Yes.
And God spoke it into existence. And he created distinction. And he created good from evil and man from woman. And God is not in nature. This idea that God is not nature was a history-changing idea that we take for granted.
That's right.
And guess what? That idea is now predominant here in America. It's called environmentalism.
That's right.
The Bible clearly states that you as a human being have dominion over the earth. It's a hierarchy, right? God over man, man over nature. There's a hierarchy to the existence. Radical environmentalism does not make that contention. They say man and nature are on equal footing if actually man might be subservient to nature, right?
That's right.
Where they'll go so as far to say that you should never disenfranchise the Delta smelt. What are you? You're a rather inefficient creature. You have to go to the restroom all the time. You fight, you go to prison, you murder each other. Look at the beautiful Delta smelt. By the way, this is one of the most ridiculous things we teach our kids, that nature is nothing but serene. Nature is bitter and harsh and awful. The point I'm trying to make here, though, is that the Bible clearly lays out that these distinctions, this hierarchy, is necessary for any sort of civilization to exist. It is no coincidence that as all of a sudden God scatters man throughout the earth, the very next chapter, he tells Abram to get off his tail and go leave your father's home to go on an adventure.
That's right.
That is not a coincidence. That is by deliberate design.
Out of paganism.
Out of paganism. And so we right now, the World Economic Forum, what is pervading our time is we are living, whether you realize it or not, in widespread paganism. In polytheism has reemerged. Atheism is not as powerful as polytheism, where everybody has their own viewpoint, their own God, and their own view system. I say, well, Charlie, what's so wrong with that? Obviously, minus the scriptures where it says man will do whatever is right in his own eyes. It's very simple. If you have many gods, you have many moralities.
That's right.
If you have one God, you have one morality. This is why, as a country, we can't say it's wrong to chop off an 8-year-old's private parts.
Right.
Because if there's many gods, there's many moralities. My God, my belief says that that's perfectly fine. As we become less monotheistic and more polytheistic, AKA shred the truths of the Bible as a society, you go what? You get into the moral chaos that Babel received.
Which all these things that Charlie and I are talking about are real tangible forerunners of a coming one world economy, a coming one world government. And look what we're seeing about a coming one world police. This stuff is actually going on. And it all plays into it. You see, Jack, that's just crazy. It may sound crazy, but the Bible anticipated it. And I'm concerned right now personally because I see America almost like it looks like a bomb, and it's, TNT is written on it when the fuse is burning, and that fuse has got maybe 20 months on it left. Because if you're China or Russia, mainly China, whatever you're going to do in the world, more than balloons, whatever you're going to do, you're going to want to do before Joe Biden leaves office. Because weakness breeds violence. I don't know if you are aware of that. But look what's happening in the world around us right now. The ridiculous thing in Ukraine is sucking this nation dry of money. It's an ongoing disaster, but we're leaderless. What's happening? A destabilized world will be the cry of a population to bring in a strong leader. And that man could very well be alive today somewhere in the world.
And this is an important point, that destabilization is not an accident, it's the strategy. Demoralization is not an accident, it is the strategy. As they try to create the modern day equivalent of the city of Babel, they need to get America out of the way. America is a strong, independent nation full of tens of millions of people, and in this room you see it, that are not going to go willingly along with the recreation of a city of Babel. So they have to do something to get us out of the way. So they're trying to break your resolve. And they know they can't go after every single one of you, so they try to pick off the people that are doing the work that advances liberty and exposes darkness. America is the last nation that stands in the way to a true global project. Now you might say, well, Charlie, what about China and Russia and all that? They want their own version of the Tower of Babel. But you know what? China and the American left are wonderful partners right now. They finance the woke left. They are cheering on critical race theory.
That's right.
Because they both have something in common. They both bitterly hate America. And they need to see America taken off the playing field. And so that's where the American people come in. It's the last best hope, besides obviously Jesus Christ and the truth, is your resolve and your commitment. And so there's so many of these different dynamics playing out right now. And I get asked all the time, Charlie, how do you see this ending and how do you see this playing out? I want you to instead ask yourself the question tonight, what am I going to do?
That's right.
That's the much more important question, because Jack will tell you how it ultimately ends. Spoiler alert, God wins, okay? Praise God. But we are going to be held to account to what did you do? Were you a spectator or a participant? And so the global game has come in right through America. We do not have a border right now in America.
That's right.
8,000 people a day walk into our country. The idea of a nation is a biblical idea. The idea of a nation with borders and boundaries, which by the way, implies humility. It implies that we're not in charge of the whole world, that we're gonna govern ourselves. Everything that we learn in Genesis 11 about man trying to dominate, man trying to centralize, man trying to create a name for themselves, they think they can get to it very soon. But the question that is yet to be answered is, How will America play along?
Well, friends, as you can tell, we are talking, Charlie Kirk and I, about some very, very deep issues. And imagine that. From the book of Genesis, chapter 11, to the modern day news events that are shaping up at this very hour. I want all of you to take a deep breath and think about that for a moment. You might think that the Bible is some ancient old dusty book, but here we are in part one of our time together. We're talking about issues that are in the Word of God thousands of years ago that are happening right now. And so with all that's taking place in a modern reassembling of the Tower of Babel, the modern version, it's no stretch to understand that what Nimrod wanted to achieve was a one-world governing empire where he himself would be the chief politician, the king, the leader of it all. God's Word addresses this. It's in the heart of man. And are we seeing it again? So I hope you learned a lot from what we just gave you, but there's more. Part 2 is going to lead us into the conclusion of this very intriguing, very, very powerful message out of Genesis 11 that speaks to our day today. We're living in amazing days. Friends, listen, you don't need to be afraid. I know the tendency is to be fearful. You don't need to be fearful. God's Word has been given to us that we can have assurance and that we might know what's coming. God loves us. In the midst of all that's taking place, you need to remember that Jesus died on the cross for you and rose again from the dead, and He gave us the Bible that we might be prepared for these last days. So friends, if you want more information, if you want to connect with us, if you want to follow us, we would love to have you visit us at jackhibbs.com for a whole lot of more teaching and information. We hope to see you right there.
You are watching Real Life with Jack Hibbs. There is a deliberate and dangerous movement underway to bring economic, military, and political power under the same umbrella of a one-world government. Under the guise of world harmony, influential leaders from all over the globe are seeking to form a new balance of power in the world. Many call it the Great Reset. How does such a movement align with what the Bible says about the last days? What are believers supposed to do about it? Charlie Kirk answers these questions and more in his booklet called The Christian Response to the Great Reset. The clock is ticking on the bomb that seeks to destroy our current freedoms in the name of globalism. Learn how to act decisively and courageously to oppose this life-threatening ideology before it's too late. The Christian Response to the Great Reset is our thank you gift for your generous donation to Real Life Ministries today. Get your copy at jackhibbs.com or by calling 877-777-2346. Order now.
Welcome to Real Life Radio with Jack Hibbs.
God's Word never will return void. God's Word is spirit, it's power, and it has its effects.